Welcome to Green and Gold FC. We have an emergency dual national themed episode because we've unfortunately all had the shock that we've lost another dual national and possibly could have Daniel Bennie defect as well. So this is part of the roller coaster of being a Socceroos fan and Australian football fan, unfortunately. We have three guests today. My usual co-host, Alex. We have South Melbourne Pete to talk about some of the experiences of migrant communities and trying to understand perspectives that maybe I don't understand as an Anglo. And we also have Aussie Scout to talk about exactly how big a loss this is. So how are you going, Alex?
Oh, I'm doing well, thank you. Look, it's not been a good last 24 hours or last 48 hours for Socceroos fans. It's been a rough one personally, seeing the news come out about a player that I was a real fan of in Adrian Segecic. And look, plenty to cover. I'd say it's a very controversial, very touchy subject for a lot of Australian football fans at the moment, but definitely a topic that has to be addressed.
You've obviously been quite critical online of Popper. What do you think? What are the points of criticism here? Do you think he shares some of the blame here? Do you think he's done some things wrong? Or do you think this also goes back to Arnie? Or do you think this is just one of those things which is out of his hands?
Look, I think Popper, for all intents and purposes, I think he's a very convincing person. I think he's a very idealistic person in which that he wants people that are entirely 100% committed. But this, for me, was one of the big reasons. And I didn't really mention this when he became international coach because I didn't really foresee this being too much of an issue. But now it is that the reason, I think one of the big reasons why I think we should have wanted an international a manager with international experience rather than a manager who was experienced at club only level is because when you get to international football, there is no room for ego and there is no room for these really sort of like heavy set ideals that at times can be counterintuitive to the progression and to the actual well-doing of the national team. Look, I've been very critical of Popper on here for his squad selections, and I'm going to continue to be very critical because he hasn't proven to me that he is sensible with the decisions that he makes. He's inconsistent with the decisions that he makes. He goes back on his word with a lot of decisions that he makes, and it's cost us on numerous occasions with primarily Nectaris Triantis and now Adrian Segecic, two players who for me were going to be mainstays with the Socceroos for the next decade. So look, to go more in depth on that, I think we need to understand a couple of points. In club football, and I know this from first-hand accounts, from Popper's time at Perth Glory, he was a guy that was either you buy 100% into the culture or you're out the door. Either you're with us or you're against us. It's black and white. The reason that works at club level for me is because club levels are projects. You don't buy in for, the team necessarily. You don't buy in for the success. Obviously, you want success, but you buy in for the project that is being presented. And Popper, to his credit, is a fantastic person when it comes to selling a project. The only issue with international football is that it is less of a project and more so a collection of players coming into one place with the ideal goal or with the collective goal of winning silverware, winning every single game, doing the absolute best as you can every single game that you can. And unfortunately, in club football, you have these long periods of being able to rebuild and go after transfer targets. And sort of if one person doesn't work out, you can go on to another player that you can then sign. You can build deeper rosters. Unfortunately, in international football, you can't do that. And we've said this before about Popper that, international football isn't something where you can just pick and choose any player you want that fits your system. You have to work with the players that you have. And my main complaint with Popper's squad selections is more so the fact that you have to be willing to put aside your ego for a second. And this is one thing that's been frustrating me about Australian football fans, especially in recent days, the ones backing Popper saying, well, we shouldn't have to sell the national team shirt. That's a fine argument to make if you're England or France or Germany or Spain or Italy. That's not the argument that you make when you're Australia, okay? This is not a country that has deep-rooted football heritage as being one of the best sides in the world. We're a side that's only really sort of coming into our second golden generation. We're a side that is well below par considering a lot of these big European nations. So, of course, you have to sell the shirt. And I've done a YouTube video on this where I detailed this example, but I'll give a brief example. If you have two companies, a big company that pays you anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000 a year, and a smaller company that's paying you $50,000 to $60,000 a year, the big company is offering you a relatively decent role, but sort of in the middle of the company, whereas the smaller company is offering you a higher role, but with less pay and with less opportunity of getting further promotions. If you're in that scenario, the small company has to sell to you the prospect of joining, because I can easily go to the other place. I can do less work, get better opportunities, and get 30, 40% more pay. The little company has to sell to me this project that, hey, if you come here, eventually you can earn more. This company will grow. You will have better opportunities. That's how it works in business. And ultimately, football is a business. Adrian Segecic made a business decision by declaring for Croatia, and that's completely fair. People saying that he doesn't deserve to represent Australia because he even gave it a second thought as to whether or not he wants to represent Croatia, it's a ridiculous argument, because if football's a business and your career spans maybe 10, 15, at most 20 years, why would you waste time trying to impress a manager that has time and time again snubbed you from the friendly squads? And I know people will say as well that, oh, well, they were just friendlies. It's not like him playing in those would have nationalized him. That's true. But what kind of message does that send to a young player when you're calling up, players like Nick D'Agostino, Mitchell Duke, players that haven't had good Socceroos form in years, players that haven't had good club form in years, and you're calling them up to the national team in place of players that are on really good form, playing at very decent levels for the capabilities of this national team? It sends an awful message. And look, even if Sega wouldn't have been capped, we had the opportunity to have Sega play 4 or 5 games for the national team by now. Obviously, that's going to do a lot more for him in his prospects of wanting to represent Australia, because it says to him, hey, you are in our plans. You are a player that we trust and a player that we're going to look to include in our World Cup squad. Stay with us. Instead, we've kept him out of these squads and said, fight for your place, earn your spot. He's been fighting for his place for his entire professional career. He's earned his spot in the national team. We haven't given it to him, and now we've lost out on that because of Popper's own ego and because of the poor decision-making of the FA.
So I thought under Graham Arnold that he was willing to give players, well, at least one player, in the case of Irukunda, who was threatening to defect, he was willing to basically start him before I thought he was in our best 11. When he was probably not even necessarily in our Ollie Woo's best 11 as a close call, but he wasn't even picked for that squad, right? And then Arnie just plays him for Socceroos qualifiers. Do you think that it's worth being a bit strategic if you're like, this person's not our best 11 now, but they're clearly going to be a top player in a few years, and ultimately not necessarily picking a best 11 for thinking about the future?
I definitely think that's an argument that we should be making, and it's something that I definitely agree with. Look, here's the thing, is that if you're one of these big countries, like I said earlier, your Spains, France, Italy, England, big countries like that, you're not going to go to these lengths to worry about nationalizing players, because you're going to always have that consistent talent pool coming through. You're always going to have a world-class player in every position. With Australia, we are a country that has many talented players, yes, but we are a team entirely or nearly entirely of dual nationals when you think about it. I mean, go through our squad and find me, any player in our starting 11 that didn't have another country that they could have picked from if they didn't pick Australia. And that's not to say that I don't want us bringing through players that have been in the national youth system. That doesn't mean that I want us going after every single player that has Australian citizenship or nationality. It just means that we need to learn where we are in the sort of food pyramid of international football, because the gap between a young player that we'd be looking to nationalize for us is a lot smaller to the gap of our starting quality than the gap of a player that maybe a France would be looking to nationalize, but to the gap of their starting quality. For example, there's not as big of a gap between James Overy and Lewis Miller as there would be between, a young player who maybe Italy want to get from Argentina versus what they actually have in their starting 11, because the gap is just going to be that big. We need to accept that as a country, we need to be chasing these kinds of players. Because we're a country of immigrants, we need to understand that some people are just going to have deep connected roots to their countries, and we're not always going to be everyone's number one pick. That's why I stressed earlier the importance of being able to sell that project, of Popper being able to put his ego aside in order to actually make these sensible decisions that are going to impact or positively impact the national team going forward.
Okay. So Uh, I want to talk about that idealism. So a generation ago, we had Aloisi willing to sacrifice his club career to play Solomon Islands, and we had people who do anything for the shirt and always putting the country first, costing their club career. And I definitely want that. It sucks that we don't have that. That setbacks or pressure from clubs can be enough to make people consider another nation. You're one of the most patriotic Aussies and big Socceroo fans I know. You'd say you'd still jump at the chance to play for Italy. Can you explain that? Is there a generation change? Is there a change to international football or how footballers think? What's going on there?
I say that more in the sense that I think that a lot of the maybe even second or third or more recent sort of immigrants to this country haven't really, on large, bought into the idea that Australia is the be all and end all. And I know that's going to be a controversial thing to say, and I know a lot of people are probably going to give me shit for it on the forums, but that's completely fine. You know, I've dealt with it before, and I'm happy to sort of cop it again for that. But as a footballer, like I said earlier, it's a business. Okay, everyone's out to make as much money as they can. Everyone's out to, to get as high a level as possible. And while you do have people that are willing to make those kinds of decisions and sacrifices for the love of their country, i.e., even in the modern game, you look at Alessandro Cacciati turning down, the opportunity to play for Italy in the future, to play for the Socceroos. I do think that by and large, I think modern football is sort of pushing people towards those kinds of decisions that are going to get them more social media followers, that is going to make them more money. When I say that I jump at the opportunity to play for Italy, I make that off the back of the fact that as a child, I grew up watching Italy. I grew up watching the Socceroos, but there was always, and I will say this nowadays. I will say this now today, that if the Italian FA and the Australian FA came to me with two offers tomorrow and both promised me the same conditions, I still would jump at the opportunity to play for Italy, because even though we might not make the World Cup, I can arguably say that I would have more benefits from my international career and even in my club career by being associated with Italy as a nation compared to the Socceroos. Not to mention, the fact of having to deal with Tony Popovic as my head coach, but that's neither here nor there. I just think that unfortunately, football's gone to a point where sort of those decisions where people are going to prioritize the higher up nation is just going to be more prevalent. Obviously, we've been very fortunate to be able to get some of these high quality dual national players. And like I said, me choosing Italy is not because I hate the Socceroos or anything. I love this country. I love the football here. I've been involved in football here at grassroots level, at state level. I've been involved at national level for futsal, for the futsal club national championships. So it's not like I don't like football in this country. I absolutely love it, and I want to see it grow at every level. But for people that have grown up in dual national households or European households or stuff like that, it's a big sort of cultural thing. I think Australia is less about nationality and national identity and more so about culture. I feel like everyone, is involved in the Australian culture of, sporting nation, get down, watch the sport on the weekend and go out to the pub with your mates and work hard and have a few beers and all this kind of stuff and all that, really nice sort of Australiana and all that culture. But when you look into the roots of it, I seriously doubt there's going to be a lot of people that come from a background of Italian or Croatian or Serbian or, Scottish or German or something that's going to look deep into themselves and say, I am Australian. I'm not this, I am Australian. I do feel like that is a thing with European people more so than not. I feel like people from, at least from my personal experience with coaching and, just speaking to people, I feel like people from Asia, Southeast Asia specifically, and sometimes even South America as well, are more willing to sort of identify with that Australian way of life and more willing to sort of out and out call themselves Australian. But I feel like with a lot of European people, they tend to feel disenfranchised with the idea of Australian culture because it is such a multicultural thing. Look, there's nothing wrong with Australian being multicultural. It is both our biggest blessing and our biggest curse as a footballing nation that we are as multicultural as we are. But in the grand sense of things, Look, I still don't blame Adrian Segecic for choosing Croatia. He has said that even though he's a third-generation Croatian, he still feels a connection to his quote-unquote homeland, and that's absolutely fair to him. I know a lot of Australians who are from different ethnic backgrounds that still do feel that deep-rooted connection to their ethnic background. So do I blame Adrian Segecic for that? No, absolutely not. I think he's taken a good opportunity. I think he still feels a connection to the Socceroos, and he would have loved to have represented us, but he obviously still feels a connection to Croatia, and it's going to be beneficial for his football career, so he's absolutely fair and justified in making that decision.
Yeah, lots of food for thought there. So obviously, we don't want our country not to be a glorified club. We want people to bleed for the shirt. But if we don't have that, then we just got to make do what we have. So final question before we wrap up. Is there anyone that you think that we should cap strategically at the World Cup that maybe, and by strategically, I mean someone who's not in our best 26, which you'd have there because you think they will be later and it's worth capping them?
I think we're actually in a fortunate position where a lot of the people I would look to sort of call up, like I said earlier, I don't know if you're in the call for it or not, Greg, because you've been cutting out for a while now, but I said that the fortunate thing with us is that for a lot of these young, talented players, the gap between them and our starters at international level is not as big as, the gap between a promising player from, let's say, Argentina that maybe Italy would want to call up. You look at it that way, there's a lot smaller of a gap between James Overy and Lewis Miller than there is between, some gaps from other countries. So when you look at players that you would call up to be nationalised, you look at the likes of Noah Skoko, Gianluca Ocon Jr., James Overy. Just off the top of my head, I can't really think of heaps of names. Marcus Walker. There are plenty of great young players around the world that are eligible for the Socceroos, and I definitely think you can take a punt on them. Another one that we haven't even mentioned, Alex Robertson. He's not even tied down for the national team yet because he hasn't been capped in an official game. So there are definitely plenty of players that I would look to cap, and I definitely think that you could easily get away with calling up someone like a James Overy and especially an Alex Robertson to your World Cup squad for the purpose of capping them internationally. I definitely think that's something that we should consider doing. I definitely think that is something that we probably will do with either the case of Alex Robertson or James Overy. If there are any other players that get called up to the friendlies, such as a Marcus Walker, Lucas Harrington's another one that I want to tie down to a national team sort of position. But if there are players like Marcus Walker, Noah Skoko, Gianluca Ocon Jr., et cetera, of course we need to look at those kinds of players. Daniel Bennie, another perfect example of a player that's got plenty of international interest, and we should probably look to tie him down to a national team spot. I do hope we do that in the future. I think that we will get a couple of players in the World Cup that will be sort of dual nationals that we bring along with the hope of tying down. And look, in an ideal world, I think we tie down all of our best young players going forward past the World Cup, I'd say in the lead up to the Asian Cup. But, we can only sort of wait and see and hope.
Yeah, a lot to think about there. Obviously, there's some challenges for the national team. Let's hope that Popper learns from this and embraces those challenges and does that well. I don't envy the job. It sounds really challenging managing all this. So thanks for joining us. Let's go to Aussie Scout. So I want to get a scout's perspective. So my understanding is you've been employed in youth development in Australia, and you have a very well-followed Twitter account as well as a member of the forum and well-followed Substack with some very interesting comments. I want to talk about how big a loss this is, both in the short term and the longer term.
Yeah.
Where does Segecic rank at the moment in terms of both potential and current Socceroos?
So, first of all, thank you for having me. Long-time listener of the podcast and follower of your work. So it's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so obviously it's disappointing news for Australian football. Adrian Segecic has decided to represent Croatia. I think there are many elements, and I know we've discussed this already, but there are many elements of what's disappointing, what's happened, and what maybe is less disappointing, and how to understand it. So the first thing is, I think fundamentally it's disappointing when players who are born and bred in Australia, who came fully through Australian youth systems, like they didn't move to Europe age 13 or 14, and who, in Segecic's case, it's certainly true. He's represented Australian youth national teams with distinction for many, many years now. When players like this decide to represent other countries, especially when, as in Segecic's case, he does have the potential to be a consistent contributor for Australia for years to come. This is a situation which I think we should avoid. We should try and make sure that every player who comes through Australian systems, who's good enough to play for Australia, plays for Australia. So I think from that perspective, just on a principled level, it's really disappointing, especially given he's been in a Socceroos squad before. He said in that November interview with Simon Hill in Football 360 that Australia was his first choice, really, that he's now chosen to represent another country. And from there, I think there are different things to think. How disappointing is it that he's been lost outside of the principled reason why it's disappointing? There's been a lot of talk about him playing for the Socceroos now and him being a difference maker for the Socceroos now. I'm not so bullish on that perspective. I'm not so sure that he would be a real difference maker for the Socceroos right now. And I think that it's disappointing in the sense that he's 21 years old, he's playing in the championship. If he turns out to have a career which his trajectory suggests he can have, then it's disappointing for many, many years to come that he's been lost. So I think in the short term, I'm not sure it's so disappointing in terms of the strength of the Socceroos World Cup squad, but I think in the long term, it is disappointing. It is really disappointing, actually.
Yeah, so it's interesting separating first of all, you said the principles, because, I feel that, gosh, I hope people out there love the Socceroos as much as I do, especially if there's been so much emotional investment as well as, youth internationals as well. We watch them come through the ages, come through clubs, come representing the countries. And so, that is obviously a gut punch. But then, of course, separating the short term from the longer term. If I think about the short term, he doesn't feature in my top 5 inside forwards. Certainly not if Volpato declares. Now that's a big if, probably
Yeah.
less likely than going to happen in the short term. But even if he doesn't, you have McGree, Metcalf, Aaron Kunda, locks. And then Garen Cole, who's similar level to him, slightly less minutes, but maybe slightly higher level.
Yeah.
Then you have Mobile, who's in a promotion chasing team. Silvera, who can also cover a wing back, is the versatility there. And Hrustic, who's in amazing form and can also cover central midfield, but also has some issues linking with the players. And some other players like Boyle and Suto, who I rank a little bit lower, but it looks like fitting him into our top 5 or 6 inside forwards, depending on how many Popper takes. We might only take 4, is hard. And in fact, you can even play Sapsford in that position because he probably
It's
more
actually
suited.
kind of similar to the position where Sapsford has been playing at club level this season.
Yeah. Often have him as number 9 because I've seen him as in quite a few positions, and some of the most eye-catching performances I had were early in the season where he seemed to play essentially as a number 9 and was very creative in transition. But if I think about the longer term future, so 2030 World Cup, you think that our players are probably prime age players, so the bulk of our squad will be those who are born between the year 2000 and the year 2006, right? So, okay, you got Aaron Kunda. If we're lucky, we get Volpato. Segecic might be third. I mean, you got Jed Drew. Bennie is looking very, very promising. We'll talk about him in a second, that he also might defect.
Yeah. Miguel
Um,
DePizio.
Yeah, DePizio, yeah. I suspect that maybe Segecic could be a very, very good chance to be one of our better players in that era. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I agree. He's 21. I think he's 21 and he's played a lot of games. He's played, I think, 1,700, 1,800 minutes in the championship this season, which Australian, that's very unusual for a 21-year-old Australian player to be playing that many minutes at a league of that quality at that age.
Yeah.
And I think Segecic has a lot of high floor attributes. He is really an outstanding ball striker, and that outstanding ball striking manifests itself in really powerful and typically quite accurate long distance left-footed shots, and even left-footed shots from both corners of the box. And also, his powerful and accurate ball striking means that he's quite a threat from deep crosses. And these attributes, as I said, are high floor, and they can take him quite a long way. And they have taken him quite a long way, despite other aspects of his game. He scored, I think, 6 goals in the championship this season, all from similar situations. The first 2 were long distance strikes on his left foot. And the fact that he's doing that at 21 years old, again, demonstrates his high floor. His left footed ball striking took him to, I think, an A-League Golden Boot last season, despite often coming off the bench and not playing as a striker. So this demonstrates a existing set of attributes, which again, at 21 years old, he can really build on. And so it is a long-term loss, I think.
So from Croatia's perspective, I imagine that the odds of him being a regular for Croatian squad are not 0. but pretty low. If you had 10 Segecics and you managed to lock in a bunch of players at his level, then maybe on average 1 or 2 or maybe 1 become good enough for the Croatian national team, but probably not 9 or 10, right? So this, from their perspective, this seems quite a aggressive recruitment strategy. Is that
Yeah.
something we should be doing on our end?
I mean, to me, like, I think we should be speaking to all the eligible players. I mean, as you said, you said it, that he probably doesn't have a very high chance of being a long-term regular for Croatia, but there is a non-zero chance. And I think that our strategy should be similar but a little bit different. That Australia should be in regular contact with all eligible players who we think have the potential to play for the Socceroos. And I think that's important.
So let's talk about what we're doing right now. So
Yeah.
we have Popper's man management strategy, which has been ultimately to call a player up and occasionally a player debuts. We saw Peter Matthews debut straight away. But often they'll get caught up, they get a look in. We saw this with Triantis, we saw this with Segecic, we saw this with Bellard. Second camp, then maybe second match, they don't even get caught up at all. Maybe they get some instructions about what they need to change. And then third camp, maybe they play. We saw some players do that. This seems to rub a lot of players the wrong way. This seems to rub Triantis the wrong way. Possibly this rubbed Segecic the wrong way. Is this a man management problem? Is there a better way of approaching this?
I think the first thing I would say is that I've seen a lot of people characterize this as some sort of strategy. I mean, personally, I don't think it is a strategy, because we've seen that in different circumstances, young players have been called up and immediately being given game time. I mean, Paul Ocon Jr. was called up for the last camp, and he played both against Colombia and against Venezuela. Jacob Italiano was called up for the camp before, I think, and he played both games as well, despite only being a late addition. So I think I would dispute the idea that there's some sort of strategy to do this. I mean, I think that there are lots of different elements to this. I think personally, I have trust in the national team staff that they will pick the players that they think are the players that should be selected for the games that are ahead of them. I think, personally, I have faith in that. And the national team staff see lots of things that we don't see. They see how players train, and Tony Popovic has made it clear in recent media appearances that players can make a genuine impression on their chances of selection by training very well in the limited time that they have before the games. I don't think there's some sort of inflexibility or some sort of hard rule where a player under a certain age gets called up for the first time and they can't play in the first camp. I don't think there's really evidence of that. I know that it happened with Segecic. I know that it happened with Triantis, but I don't think this is a hard and fast rule. I mean, as to how those situations were managed, I don't think that there is some necessary entitlement that a young player who comes into their first camp in good form has to play minutes. I think that we should have faith in our national team staff that they see the players on the training park and they pick who they think should play, and that maybe it is the opinion of the national team staff that players adjust to the quality of a national team training camp or national team training over the course of multiple windows. And I mean, in the September friendlies against New Zealand, Nicholas Milanovic saw the pitch. That was his first. I think he was selected for a training camp in June, but he'd never been in a proper Socceroos squad before. So I don't think there's this inflexibility or this rigidity that if you're under a certain age, you can't play in the first camp. And I also don't think it should be taken by players in and of itself as a reflection on their national team future that in their first camp, they don't get minutes. But I think what is crucial in that is that there should be open communication. And I mean, I'm not privy to this, so I'm not saying that this doesn't exist, but I think it's important that national team, that particularly with young players and particularly in this new climate of international football that we're in, that players understand, especially in their first camps, the reasons why or why not they're receiving minutes. And this doesn't have to be hours of conversation, but it should be made clear so that they're not liable to thinking that they're unwanted or they're not good enough. I mean, the other thing I would say is that players, by even being selected in a national team camp, I think that's a reflection of the fact that the coaching staff thinks that the players are good enough. So I think there are many things at play, but I do think that it's important that there is communication with players as to why they're playing, why they're not playing, and if they're not playing, what might be expected of them to warrant selection.
So you used the word entitlement, and obviously that robs a lot of fans the right way, what looks like entitlement, and I've certainly had that feeling myself. But in the end, there's also a thought in the back of my mind of how many players have reacted by threatening to defect after not getting time. Aaron Kunda famously did that, and Graham Idle, I thought, gave him minutes before, he gave him a start, in fact, not just minutes, before I thought he was in our best 11 players in Australia. Uh, Alex Robertson, after not getting selected for the Asian Cup, of course, deleted all his Socceroos photos and looked like he was going to defect. Trantis, of course, and Segecic both seem to defect. Trantis, I believe, has come out saying he didn't feel the vibe after being called up and not being given time. So it seems in all those cases. And just in the last couple of days, we also had Daniel Bennie saying he'll play for the team that believes in him out of Scotland and Australia. If everyone's like this in that whole generation amongst our elite players, can we afford to be too picky about entitlement and loyalty?
I mean, I think there are a number of things at play here again. I think that, as I mentioned before, we've reached a new climate of international selection. The world is different to the world of 20 or 30 years ago. Like, countries like Australia have large populations of people who have complex national identities, and scouting strategies of diaspora populations have been used to great success by national teams. I mean, I've discussed it on Twitter before, but Morocco made a World Cup semi-final at the last World Cup off the back of a squad which was the majority of which was not born or raised in Morocco. And we see now, even with this change of association platform, that there's kind of like a transfer culture, a club football transfer culture developing around international football, which definitely didn't exist before. So I think the question was, like, can we afford to give players the opportunity to equivocate about their national team future? I mean, again, I think there are lots of things at play here. I mean, I think that there are situations where we should seek to lock down. I mean, it's hard now under the new eligibility rules. It's hard to really lock down a player because a friendly doesn't lock them in, and really they have to play 4 competitive games to be locked in, I believe. So it's hard to really, in one window, lock them in. But I think that where there is a player of real potential, of real quality, who can really raise the level over a long period of the national team, then we should be proactive and we should try and lock down as best as we can their long-term future for Australia. But I also think, I think what's been lost in some of the conversation around this is, like, we're now 3 months from a World Cup. And I'm sure all Australian fans want to see the Socceroos be as prepared and as strong as possible at the World Cup. So really, I think at the moment, the priority should be that. And the two things are not mutually exclusive. You can try and secure dual national players while also trying to prepare for a World Cup. I mean, there are lots of dual national players who I would like to see secured. Antonio Arena is one that people discuss. Chelsea youngster Marty Nicol-Jazuli is another one. And there are lots of others. I think I listed a lot of them in a recent article. Dylan Shikluna, Christian Volpato. There are lots. Noah Skoko. There are lots and lots of these players. But I think that there are priorities to balance for the national team staff. And as I said, probably the top priority right now is maximizing the performance of the Socceroos at the next World Cup. I mean, I'm sure you would agree. But I think I said elsewhere, like, there are opportunities where we can prioritize locking in players for the future. So, I mean, we've discussed this before, but round 2 Asian qualification, these are competitive games which often see big score lines against much weaker Asian nations. I mean, that would be a window where I think it would be wise in certain special circumstances to focus on securing the long-term future of Australian players or dual national Australian players. But I think there's lots of things at play here, and that it's not just about securing players, but it's also about preparing the squad. And I would say also, like, again, 6 months, 9 months, 3 months out from a World Cup, or even when we were still in Asian qualification trying to secure our place in the World Cup, I think that it's important that all players see that the priority is qualification or preparation.
Yeah, absolutely. I do hope that we do some strategic call-ups during the second round of qualifiers. Is there any player which you would either strategically call up in the World Cup because they're just that good that it's worth giving a World Cup squad to, even if they're not in our top 26 right now, but their potential is that high? or alternatively that we should really prioritize capping because they already can make an impact?
I mean, I think in the World Cup, I think it's hard. I mean, just taking someone to a World Cup doesn't lock them in. So taking someone to a World Cup and having them sit on the bench for the whole World Cup, I think that's kind of transparent and might be viewed as such by a player in question. I mean, we saw at the last World Cup that Graham Arnold tried to pick Christian Volpato and he didn't accept that, even though he definitely would have played a role at the World Cup. So some of the players I mentioned, Volpato, Shikluna, Skoko, Nicol Jazuli, Gianluca Ocon, Antonio Arena. These are players who I would love to see commit to playing for Australia. Whether any of them should be, like, Volpato and Shikluna would be in my squad for the World Cup if they commit, but Skoko is there and thereabouts. Arena is someone who could be considered, but I'm not sure that he would commit to Australia at this point. Like, he's considered one of the biggest talents of his generation in Italy, so I think that's probably his priority right now. But yeah, I mean, I think in the future, some of the names that I mentioned, I would like to see the Football Australia make a concerted effort to secure them. For now, apart from Shikluna and Volpato, I'm not sure there are any players whose eligibility could be or should be resolved with a World Cup place.
Okay, thanks so much for joining us and bringing some nice clarity and on this from a Scout's perspective on some of these defections. It's all anxious times for a Socceroo fan to see all these people disappear, and obviously very, very deeply disappointing when someone defects, but we understand that that's become part of the nature of the game, unfortunately. So we hope that we get some of these really exciting dual nationals to commit for us. All right, we're now on our third guest of the evening on this special edition of like why we're struggling to get dual nationals to really care about the sport. So I want to talk about one of the elephants in the room is that we've gone through a process of essentially marginalising clubs which are proud of their migrant heritage, and whether that's had an effect on how passionate a lot of people from migrant communities feel about the Socceroos. I'm certainly not suggesting a direct effect. I'm not saying that, oh, Mark Coney was not accepted, so Valpardo is not playing. Oh, Sydney Olympics is not accepted, so Triantis is not playing. But I think if you're in a community where everyone's gung-ho about the Socceroos versus a community where people are a bit lukewarm about the Socceroos, that is going to affect how you feel, especially if you grow up in that community. So I wanted to talk to a regular on the show, a good friend of mine, South Melbourne Pete, who was one of the most passionate Socceroos fans, still one of the most passionate Australian football fans and South Melbourne fans, who's trying to get his love back for the Socceroos, but has been feeling lukewarm due to decades of essentially some of the decisions and behaviour of some fans, some of the racial vilifications. I want to hear that perspective because I think it's really important as much as it's a tough conversation. How you going, Pete?
Hey, Graham. Great to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic. So can you tell us, first of all, like what the Socceroos, following the Socceroos was like for you, basically until 2006?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Growing up as a football fan, particularly in the 80s and the 90s, when, once every 4 years, you're really glued to your TV or going to games, hoping that the Socceroos would qualify for a World Cup, was one of the most extraordinary experiences as a sports fan anyone can ever experience. The constant near misses, the additional time that wasn't played against Israel, and Frank Garrick on the sidelines pointing at his watch, and we didn't get through. The penalty shootout against Canada to get through. Dare I mention? I won't mention it yet. Playing, thinking we had a chance to beat Argentina with Maradona, actually feeling like you had a chance. In hindsight, it seems crazy, but we weren't that far off. A deflected goal, interception by Maradona. It was just the most gripping sporting experience as a football fan because it felt like life and death. It was, it really did. And then, I will mention it now, that fateful day versus Iran is the only time in all my years of following sport I literally cried after that game. I've seen losing grand finals. I've been an Essendon supporter for a long time. I should cry every day, right? Like, but that I was literally in tears after that game, and as were those around me. So it just, and then to finally get through in 06, it was I've been to multiple grand finals, both AFL and NSL. I've been to Club World Cup, but that making the World Cup in '06 was the pinnacle of being a sports fan in my lifetime. It was just
How many times have
decades
you watched replays?
of emotion. Decades of emotion coming out, and it was extraordinary. So it was just, yeah, it felt like everything. It felt like the Socceroos would qualify for a World Cup, and that would be the holy grail. So it was amazing. It was both extraordinarily painful, but then that '06 just seemed to be the pinnacle. It just felt like it was just built for that moment.
And so if it's a choice between, now you can answer this however you want, but if it's a choice between Greece and Socceroos, say in 2006, 2002, 2000, and, whenever, who is it for you?
I wouldn't have even hesitated. And in fact, I remember asking my late father during that period, who he would support in that instance, and he didn't hesitate. And you got to remember that Australia's given our communities, our migrant communities, I should say, everything. Our families came here for a reason, and the life it's given us, is so important. And you'll find most migrant communities are very, very passionate Socceroos fans. I remember in the '80s and '90s going to a lot of going to the NSL games and having some really fierce rivals against, Melbourne Knights and Preston and so forth. And, sometimes, it wasn't very pleasant. But the funny thing was, a few days later, the Socceroos would be playing at Olympic Park or somewhere else, and we'd all be together supporting the Socceroos, like we were best buddies all of a sudden. And it was a real bonding football experience, because whilst we were rival fans at clubland, we were football fans. We were Australian football fans first and foremost. And it's quite. I look back now and you giggle, because those fans you really didn't like so much were also people that you stood in the terraces with, cheering the Socceroos on. And it was you almost you wore the Socceroos badge with the badge of honour.
So what was the turning point for you? Do you remember it, or was it a gradual thing?
There was a specific moment in time, unfortunately, that it all comes down to, and I didn't realise it at the time, but everything that's happened since has reinforced a moment. Now, I was lucky enough to go to the 2006 World Cup, to go to the Australia versus Japan game, and to live that experience was just, still to today, emotionally, the most powerful sports fan moment of my life. To be there 1-0 down, and it's that what happened in those last 20 odd minutes, and to have been there in Kaiserslautern was extraordinary. And I felt like I could walk on water, and left the ground, and feeling amazing, and the euphoria of to have lived it, you just can't describe it. And I got on a train to head back to my accommodation, and was talking to other Socceroos fans in my Socceroos shirt. Needless to say, the topic of club football came up, and all of a sudden the tone of the discussion changed very quickly. It got to the point where I was being racially vilified for being Greek. Did I repeat that I was wearing my Socceroos shirt? And that Greeks destroyed club football, just destroyed football in Australia. And we were, these terrible people. And it was the first time I'd experienced that racial vilification against me as a Greek Australian, and in Australian football. Now, it was a very unpleasant experience, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It should never have happened. But the problem is, everything I've experienced, a lot of what I've experienced, yet not everything, a lot of what I've experienced since, both from other fans of A-League, many A-League fans, not all, and from administrators, has reinforced that I'm a second-class citizen because I'm a Greek Australian supporting a club that was founded by Greek migrants. That includes words like the word bitters, and we are bitter. We were left out of the A-League. Yes, absolutely, we are bitter. We think with good reason. We're constantly. Every time Southampton would bid for an A-League licence, people will come out of the woodworks and say we can't have ethnic clubs in the A-League. We can't turn back to the bad old days We're not. We've had Football Australia in my mind, and it's been said through other people that bring up the fact that they weren't going to let clubs like South Melbourne into the A-League. And, we even had an administrator, Di Pietro, in the last bidding process saying we needed to maintain the mainstream integrity of the game. Am I not mainstream Australian? I think I am. And if I was a Melbourne Victory supporter, would I be a mainstream Australian? And if I'm a South Melbourne supporter, I'm not. It's that constant reinforcement that we are ethnic, that we are not Australian, we're not mainstream Australian, has been happening for the best part of 20 years since. And that's just made me feel that disassociation, provided a disassociation between myself and the wider game in Australia, and really made me focus on what I can control, which is my love for my club, which is now first and foremost above anything else.
So you have in recent times actually gone to the Socceroos games occasionally, I believe. Does your passion ever come back or down based on positive experiences or negative experiences, or can you go run us through that?
Yeah, it's very hard. I want to love the Socceroos again. I really do. It's not a switch you can switch on. Football is about passion, and it comes from the heart. And when you've constantly been, stabbed in the heart a few times, it's very hard. I definitely want them to win. There was a time where I didn't even watch the games at all. I didn't care if they won or lost. I'm definitely trying, but I don't know if I'll ever recapture that passion for the Socceroos again. It's because of those years of constant racial vilification, direct and indirect. And I think sometimes it was spiteful too. There are people out there who have been very spiteful. They know who they are. We all know who they are, that are constantly digging into and saying that we can't have clubs like South Melbourne, and not just South Melbourne, but your Preston, your Melbourne Knights, Sydney Uniteds, Marconis, all the rest of them. It's not just about my club. It's my club for me, but it's about all clubs for all people. Be playing top flight football because somehow a club that was founded by Australians 60 years ago are not mainstream Australian. It's just not appropriate.
So I got very interested in the research on this, on assimilation, patriotism, and patriotism of migrants, because I'm an immigrant to England myself. I'm diehard Aussie, very, very patriotic Aussie. But I was thinking, 10, 15 years down the track, I'm probably going to feel a real sense of patriotism towards England. And I started thinking about, the history of England, all the things that England's done, some of the great writers they've had, some of the great scientists they've had, some of the great sports stars they had, all that sort of stuff. And joining part of that community. And I didn't realize that England is a place where there's a big anti-migrant backlash. And the policy that's followed for that is my family, the amount we have to pay goes up every year. At the moment, the cost of being here is £52,000 plus indirect fees, which are quite a lot. That's absolutely bankrupt. Working class background, we are spending it paycheck to paycheck to spend money on that. And one thing that I really observed about myself, I was watching myself, is whenever there's a change in policy to make things harsher or some rhetoric, I noticed my feelings changing. I started feeling more patriotic about Australia, telling maybe baking a pavlova, playing Aussie music, telling my kids about Aussie history or something like that, or showing them old Aussie games, sort of thing. And it got me curious about the research on this. So there's this amazing paper. It's by Visaliki Fuka. So they had a look at German migrants to USA after World War One. And German migrants there, they were, for whatever reason, they started German language schools, and they started teaching their kids lots of German culture. And they weren't ethnic in Australia, but for some reason they're ethnic there. My wife tells me that there was already a history that what pushed them into that was there was already a degree of marginalisation mixed with essentially a pride of their heritage. So probably some similar story. Now, some states, different states react to it differently because, humans are humans, and you want everyone to love your country as much as you. I'm very open to that. I want everyone to love the Socceroos, want everyone to love Australia, who lives in Australia. So they tried some heavy-handed assimilation strategies. They banned German-speaking schools. They banned quite a few things where Germans were expressing their culture. And the results are amazing. And there's many papers looking at similar policies around the world, but I'm just picking on this one for now. Germans in states which did that compared to states which didn't, they're more likely to give their kids German names, ethnic names, not just their kids, their grandkids, generation after generation, feeling a stronger tie to Germany. It really didn't break until basically Nazi Germany made German nationalism impossible for anyone. Intermarriage rates from German to German goes up. Volunteer for the US Army basically halves. It goes from 13% to 6%. As worse than halves. People are just feeling, it just backfires. People feel more German. And that's essentially just human. And people can easily see that and feel resentment and feel bitterness, right? They can feel, because people want people to love their country. And so then they get frustrated that people don't. They have a backlash against, well, they do love their country. Sorry, that's wrong. But they have a backlash against people that they perceive don't. And then that pushes them away, and you get this vicious cycle, which just gets worse and worse. And I feel like we've gone through that in the Australian football community.
Yeah, I can understand that. And, I went to the 2004 Euros as well and celebrated Greece winning the Euros, which, it's hard to believe that happened now. But I probably follow how the Greek national team is doing now more than I used to back then, if that makes sense. And that's because I've been pushed away. I feel like I've been pushed away. If you're constantly told you're Greek, well, maybe I am, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll go somewhere that doesn't tell me you're not Greek, you're Australian, right? So I can understand that. And whilst I'm not, I don't want to overplay that, because in Australian society outside of football, I feel we do multiculturalism pretty well in this country, which is quite ironic, right? Because the only time I feel I'm being racially vilified is in the world game, which is supposed to be the most multicultural game in Australia, which is it's bizarre, right? It just shouldn't be that way. So I think when you are constantly telling people they don't belong, that they're not Australian, you're either pushing them away from the game, full stop, and there are many that have. I'm well aware of many people that have just walked away from Australian football, full stop. They don't support anyone. Or there's others that go, or I'll still support my traditional club, but I just don't have that association with the Socceroos anymore. So has that led to what we've seen at the moment with players choosing their grandparents' essentially, country of birth over their and their parents' country of birth? I don't know, but it definitely doesn't breed an environment of being proud to be an Australian, proud to be an Australian soccer player or football player, where, other than a few Croatian players during that era of post-war, it's a different story altogether. I think it's a totally different topic. Generally speaking, we had people were just really passionate about the Socceroos, and not just the Socceroos, the Olyroos, the young Socceroos. We had a tournament here in, what was it, 93, I think it was, where the games were getting sold out across Australia. They were people of my generation, children of migrant parents, who really associated with them. So now we've gone a bit backwards in terms of that emotional connection is probably the best way of putting it, to the Socceroos. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but I can only talk about my experience, and everyone else can only speak about their experience. But we haven't bred that same level of passion in the communities, in the football community, by telling people they can't be part of the game. So it may have had an impact. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And you use your word bitter. That was the nickname before. And people can assume that this is just bitterness, throwing toys out with the cod from migrant communities or whatever, some sort of immaturity. But I mean, I'm a deeply religious man. So one thing I do whenever there's like some harsh statement about immigrants or visa fees go up or something like that, I pray for the people that they be blessed, that they have good families, that they have, until there's no resentment in my heart, because that's important to me, not have a resentment. And yet I'm still doing more patriotic things when again pushing away. It's just human nature, right? To just go into, if you're rejected by community, to go to the one, bond with the one and feel passion for the one which accepts you. So we need to sort this out as well, because when I think about who are the players which have that elite potential to take the Socceroos to the next level, still a little bit below where the golden generation managed, but much better than what we have. I can't think of any which aren't migrants, dual nationals. And a lot of them are from the dual nationals, which had that particular, Croatians, Italians, and Greeks. Most of them are from that community. And so if we don't sort this out, if we don't develop that passion, then there is going to be some lukewarmness. It is going to make a difference if you grow up in Australia, you're not surrounded by people who are bleeding for green and gold because of how they've been treated. So I want to ask, obviously we advocate for promotion, relegation and the national second tier all the time on this pod, but in the end, we're not in charge. Is there anything we can do as fans to try and heal some of those wounds, try and help you feel that passion? Because I'd love after a game, because you're a mate, I'd love after a game to vent with you if it was bad, or celebrate with you if it's good, right? That's one of the most beautiful things about football. Is there any path to get back there? Anything we can do to help you? Say you're trying. How can we try?
Yeah, I'll go back a bit actually, and it reminds me. John Aloisi talks about this in some interviews, and he grew up an Italian Australian, playing for Adelaide City, and he talks about how that community, Italian community around Adelaide City, really harnessed his passion for the game.
Mm.
And you think about John Aloisi, what's the first thing you think about? You think about the penalty shootout, right? These clubs have got an enormous role still to play to develop players. It's not 1980 anymore. Things have changed, right? We can't just go back and all of a sudden we're going to produce the next Mark Viduka. But they're football clubs. First, remember, these clubs are football clubs. They're not for profit. They're football clubs first and foremost. Mark Viduka went through Melbourne Knights Football Club, all right? And so did all those other Paul Icon and all the rest of them. All went through these great clubs that from a young age and had that close allegiance to that community in that game, and those clubs brought those people up. Ange talks about it as well. He grew up around Middle Park and South Melbourne. Let's harness that first and foremost. But at the moment, there is a very clear ceiling as to what players can do, and then they're lost. Those players are lost. No, there's no clear path from playing for your local NPL club all the way through the Socceroos. Yes, you can still make it that way, but it's not like it used to be. What a connected national second division would do is allow those clubs to invest more into that player development, because it makes sense, because all of a sudden there's also then a clearer path to be able to sell those players overseas as well. So a connected pyramid not only helps up the quality of the football that's being produced, but it gives the clubs the recipe to be able to do it and that environment to be able to do it as they've done in the past. So I think the whole ecosystem can gain by giving these clubs a great opportunity to aspire, because the whole of football rises if we've got a strong second division and allow these clubs to succeed. But one thing we could do immediately, well, that's one thing we should do immediately, but other things we can do is stop criticising people like myself for supporting the club we grew up supporting. We're Australian football fans. We're not the Euro snobs, as I often talked about. We're still going to games, still supporting the game. You don't have to support another club. Respect us as fans, respect the clubs we support who have done so much for the game from the 50s onwards, because we wouldn't have had the 06 Socceroos or before that without those clubs. Show some respect. Stop being ignorant and stop talking about the negative aspects of it. Start being positive and start showing some respect for the fans and those clubs, and stop calling us names like bitters. I think that's changing. I think the Nationals, even last year, I noticed a bit of a difference. There's still a few people out there that like to bring up topics because they don't like certain people being in charge of certain clubs, because they think all of a sudden we need to be all, multicultural, mainstream Australians. Don't get me started. But those every time people post those kind of things on social media, it's a knife, it's a dagger in the heart to everyone who's loyal and supports those clubs. So that stuff has to stop as fans. But Football Australia can also take some leadership too. You can't blame today's administrators for the faults of yesterday. But what they can do is acknowledge the faults of yesterday. And I don't want to compare it to the apology that was given to the stolen generation, because that is a much larger issue. But a symbolic acknowledgement, an apology for what's happened in the past, it draws a line in the sand and it says, you know what, that wasn't good enough. NSIP wasn't good enough. Kicking clubs out of not allowing them to participate in the A-League because of their origins was not good enough. We apologise for that. We won't let that happen again going forward. Let's find a way now to reunite the game. It's not going to happen overnight. We've started the Champions League format of the championship, and these are the steps we're going to take forward with you to reunite the game. And if I heard those words from the chairman of Football Australia or the CEO of Football Australia, I think it would make a big difference and send a real clear message to all of football that those arguments of the past are in the past. We can't change it, but what we can do is move together in a unified way. And this is the path forward. And we're going to show some leadership. And leadership is also acknowledging the negative things that have happened in the past. And I think that would take real leadership if somebody did that from Football Australia.
So let's hope that someone from Football Australia is listening and takes that on board. In the meantime, I do want to apologise, at least as a fan, for whatever that means for how our football community has treated those who did so much to build the game, particularly the Greeks, Italians, and Croatians. Thank you for the golden generation and for what you do today in promoting the game to young kids. And yeah, apologies for the NCIP. And for the exclusion of ethnic clubs from the top tier, as well as claiming that they're holding the game back. So that's. I hope you enjoyed our three guests to give three different perspectives on crisis in wooing dual nationals. Thank you so much for Aussie Scout, my usual co-host Alex, and for Pete. Please join us on the forum at greenandgoldfc.com. We're also on Twitter, Spotify, and Apple. Until next time, that's all we have time for. It's bye for now.